All right, here it is, haXe. All right. So, what I'll be going off is that this will be two parts here. This will be an overview of a really, again, crash course here on the overview of the of what haXe is. Again, it's it's a whole different language, so I'm not going to go into the syntaxes and that kind of stuff. There's data structures and whatnot, because those are actually, there's plenty of information out there on the internet. But if you've never heard about haXe, or you're curious about what haXe means to FDT, this is a really great way to get started and see. And I'll actually show haXe in action with FDT. Again, this is a part of FDT free. All of haXe is part of FDT free. So I'll build a simple JavaScript example here. So a little bit more about haXe is there's a lot of ways to talk about haXe, and people describe it as like multi-target, multi-platform, multi-language, script generators, compiler. There's a lot of words that you can use to describe haXe. I like to use multi-platform and that's because that how it works is that you write in haXe, and then you have the option to output different targets. So you have output to different platforms. So I could write, I use the same syntax and the same way of building my application, and I could choose to then export a Swift. I can use it to export JavaScript code. So it'll actually be, in this case, it's a script generator. And the same thing for PHP. It can have it be to generate PHP for me. And I can actually also have it generate C++ and Nico for me. The C++ and Nico, that's definitely, well, you can just tell. C++ is that everyone knows it's a lower level language, mostly for desktop applications. And Nico is actually a web server application that was that Nicholas has created, who is the creator of haXe, by the way. And that's kind of what he was using haXe for, but he also has expanded haXe to include these multiple platforms. One thing I will say before going on is that I have seen a lot of people talk about haXe, and there's a lot that can be said. You read it on the internet, and I will be totally honest here, and that is that it's definitely not a magic bullet. I feel like that a lot of times it gets sold that it's it's going to find your car keys, it's going to change Coke to Pepsi. That's not really the case. It's not the case where I build, I write some haXe code, and then I say for example, I want to build an application that has a red ball bouncing around. So it's not going to be the scenario where you code in haXe and you make this red ball bouncing around, and I can output a Swift, and so I'll just click some button and some magic happens and I have a Swift. And then without changing anything at all, I want JavaScript, right? So I, maybe hit another little button, and all of a sudden JavaScript pops out. And of course, for PHP it doesn't make any sense, because PHP is a server-side language. It's not going to automatically somehow come up with some way of generating red balls for me on the screen there. So it's definitely to keep in mind that from my experience and people out there actually using haXe in this kind of multi-platform way, what I see them do is I see them, it's all the same syntax, and they can share libraries. Like, for example, suppose you build a math library, or a messaging, an event system library, like robot legs. You're sure about like robot legs. Those kinds of things, yes, you could definitely share across all these platforms. But you're going to have to write platform-specific code, no matter what. It's going to be there. So, like, for example, when I'm writing in Flash, I'm going to have to be using, they've actually mirrored the Flash API, so I will actually be writing haXe code, but it'll be a very similar Flash API that I'll be hooking into. And same thing for JavaScript. When I'm writing for JavaScript, you're going to have to know about how JavaScript works. And so you have to be familiar with those APIs, for example. And the same thing for PHP. So you actually have to be knowledgeable in each of these targets to output to these targets. So that's a very, very important distinction I want to make there. And so I believe it's demo time by using a simple JavaScript example.